Hi, my name is Joe Wasserman. Welcome to another edition of Peace is Possible. Today we're going to talk with Henry Lowendoff from the Greater New Haven Peace Council about uh, the, the bloated military budget and ways we could use that money if the military budget was cut. Every year they seem to increase the military budget and then say there's no money for education, no money for mass transit, no money for environmental programs. And we say there is the money there. It's in the military. It's in the military budget. So so without further ado, I will introduce Henry Lowendoff, and he will take it from here. Thank you.
So thank you, Joe, and thank you, Carmen, for inviting me onto this program. What I'm going to do is present a slideshow to make some points about the military budget and especially about the needs of our communities that are not being addressed because so much money goes into wars and killing from this country, and that's our resources and our tax money. So what I would like to do at this point is share my screen and go through the slideshow. And Joe, if you have questions while I'm going along, if I miss something or leave something unclear, please don't hesitate to interrupt, and I'll try to respond. So can you see that slide?
Yes.
Okay, good. So basically, this is a presentation on how military spending in this country suffocates us, and of course, it also drives military spending in many countries around the world because the United States is the lead military spender and the major power, still the sole superpower, and so other countries fearful of the United States or allied with the United States, either one, raise their military budgets when we raise ours. And I'm going to be speaking about a project of the U.S. Peace Council, of which the Greater New Haven Peace Council is a chapter. So what the military spending is doing and what we do about it. So let me start with the fact that all of our cities and states, but primarily our cities, are in economic crisis. Our cities don't have money. We keep cutting the school budget or not raising the budget of the schools to meet the needs of our children. Now, this is true for all of the cities in New Haven. For the smaller towns like Greenwich, it's not so important because they're wealthy and they have plenty of money to spend. But for our cities, for New Haven, for Hartford, Waterbury, Meriden, Bridgeport, New London, having enough money for the schools is very hard to come by. And people are constantly saying, stop raising taxes on us, but we want good schools. So we have this conundrum because the cities don't have the money. And this is true for a lot of other social needs. Healthcare is very expensive in this country. There are still many people who don't have insurance. And for people who do have insurance, many of them have it's so costly that they can't take advantage of it. For families that need childcare, the cost of childcare is practically equal to the cost of the wages that one gets. This is a question of whether you can afford childcare. Our libraries keep on getting cut. In New Haven, the libraries have about a fifth or a fourth of the number of staff that they really need. The parks, recreation, even the fire department is struggling to have enough money to keep the fire stations open. And so the cities are in trouble. And on a broader level, we can't guarantee clean water anymore. We know that Flint and Cleveland and a number of other cities are people are drinking water that is toxic. There's lead in the water. There are microorganisms and so forth that aren't being cleaned. The sewage systems in this country are old and decrepit and poorly working. We have an affordable housing crisis, which we could go into, but is unnecessary. But it's driving people are paying half of their income on housing or more. The roads, even though they're constantly being repaired, are in terrible conditions. I drive through New Haven. I live in New Haven, and some of the roads are new. That's very nice, but a lot of the roads are just pitted with holes and patches and are very uneven, in some ways dangerous. Public transportation in the United States is second rate. We don't have a train system across the country as Europeans do. The United States has a public transportation system that's really third world. Bridges and dams, according to the engineers, many of them are in bad shape and need desperate repair. The rail system, the bus system, the ports are in need of help. Our electric grid is outdated. Why aren't we fixing these? Why aren't we maintaining public needs to have a society that works smoothly? All of these things are not only create problems, but they're positively dangerous. So here are the human needs. This is a list of some of the human needs, our community needs, our family needs that are not being met in this country. Why not? This is the richest country in the history of the world. How is it that we can't pay for schools, decent schools? We can't make sure that all the kids going to school, when they finish, they are literate. 20% of the adult population in the United States is functionally illiterate. 20%. It's unbelievable what is needed and what we're not doing. So I made the point. What our government policies are accelerate poverty in our cities. Basically, for the last 40 years, the government has been stripping the public sector. There are public service cuts. There are cuts in transportation, cuts in schools, cuts in maintenance, and so forth. We have cuts in pensions. Workers are fighting to keep up a pension so that when they're no longer able to work and they retire, they have an income. We have a social security system that could be very powerful and adequate, and for many people it is. For many people, it's a sole source of income, but $1,000 or $1,500 a month is not sufficient to keep somebody alive and healthy. And we have a government that wants to privatize it and make it a lottery. We see companies laying workers off, in part because their business is in trouble, or because they just want to save money for whatever reason. There's too much competition or not enough, so they lay off people. Our local and state taxes are repeatedly being increased, and in fact our federal taxes are increased because the tax cuts that have been instituted really affect mainly the super rich. And public services are being privatized. Where we have publicly owned water, the city or the state wants to sell it off to private corporations. Most of our utilities are private. We do have some publicly owned utilities, but most of them are private. The government has been deregulating. It's taking regulations off, allowing corporations to do whatever they want. And under the Trump administration, we're being promised that there'll be more privatization and more deregulation. We have food inspectors that go through food plants, not enough of them, and they don't do it enough, but they're tasked with making sure our food is safe. We have water companies that are tasked with making sure our water is safe. But the Trump administration, but it's not the only one, is planning to cut back on all of these things. So government policies are accelerating poverty in the cities. It's also in the rural areas. So we shouldn't forget this. What happens in the cities is also spread around the country. So the government policies are accelerating poverty. And whenever the war budget is being discussed in Congress, it's sacrosanct. They can't cut the war budget. They refuse to cut it, but everything else can be cut. Money for health care, money for housing, money for education, money for preserving the climate. All of those sectors are under the cutting knife. The military-industrial complex isn't. So where's the money gone? And where's the money to pay for our families and our communities that need it? Where's the money to pay for the services and so forth and make life decent in this country? So that's what this slideshow is about. That's what this presentation is about. Just to begin this is a slide that shows the cost to taxpayers in the United States of the wars since 2001 and the ongoing wars. So the cost, the amount of money that the United States is sending to Israel to invade Palestine and now Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Iran, and Yemen, all these countries, all these neighbors, and the occupied territories that Israel is invading, the United States has sent $23 billion for that, $23 billion. And in fact, since 1951, the United States has handed to Israel $318 billion. Well, that's a huge amount of money. That could do a lot for our country, but it's been handed to another country. In Ukraine, through September of this year, that's basically 2 3/4 years. Well, yeah, it's just 2 3/4 years of a war. $175 billion the United States has sent to Ukraine. This is an enormous amount of money. And if we add up the wars since 2001, starting with Afghanistan, but going to Iraq and Libya and Syria, these are the wars the United States has fought. None of them, by the way, declared by Congress. Congress has not declared war since the Second World War. So these wars are illegally fought. 6,000 billion, that's $6 trillion minimally, the United States has spent since 2001. And the Pentagon is now planning a hot war with China, one of the biggest economies in the world. And there are reasons for this, which I hope to be able to get into. But they're not good reasons. They're reasons that are deadly, not just for the people in the countries that are being attacked, but also for our own people. As I've tried to indicate already, what we need, to meet our human needs, we need the resources, and the resources, as you can see, have gone into war and are going into war in big time. But this is just a part of it. This is a small part, actually. Here's where our taxes go, and we have to ask ourselves, is this where we want our taxes to go? So the war budget for the proposed fiscal 2025 war budget um, is $1.1 trillion. The total budget that President Biden proposed for fiscal 2025, that's starting in October of this year and going through October of next year, 1.6 trillion. 69% of that total budget that Biden proposed is going to war, to make weapons, to send weapons, to use weapons, to slaughter people. 69%, that's more than 2/3. And that means that just under $500 billion goes to everything else that the federal government supports: health, housing, education, energy, environment, agriculture, transportation. 31%, less than a third, has to be divided up among these. So making sure that we produce enough food, making sure the food is safe, taking care of moving from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources, improving the efficiency at which we use energy, making sure that houses aren't wasting energy, and our transportation system, like cars and buses and trucks, aren't wasting energy, aren't polluting. The money for that is being cut, and it's small potatoes compared to what goes to war. So what else does this war economy? We have a war economy. So what else is it doing? Well, wars are waged abroad and at home, and I've given some indication of how they're waged at home. And of course, they're waged abroad. The Ukrainians and the Russians are dying. The Palestinians and the Lebanese are dying, but so are the Israelis with these wars. And the United States government is dedicated to keeping these wars going. It is not dedicated to stopping the wars. It wants to keep these wars going, and there are reasons for that. One of the reasons is that it's enormously profitable to the military-industrial complex. And the military-industrial complex not only getting hundreds of billions of dollars a year, but also using a small amount of that to lobby, to pay off our members of Congress, to advertise, to claim that they're doing good, to propagandize us. That military is doing well. The United States, since the 1990s, has had a policy of full spectrum dominance. It's the goal of the military industrial complex. It's the goal of the people who run this country. It is not just military dominance, but economic dominance, political dominance, diplomatic dominance, and cultural dominance. And any country that does not abide by allowing the United States to tell it how to run its affairs is threatened by the United States. That's what full spectrum dominance means. Some of the countries have actually been invaded, as I indicated. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Lebanon now. The Palestinians have been attacked. The United States is supporting this war in Ukraine. It couldn't continue without US support. In fact, it wouldn't have started if the United States had not been meddling in the affairs of Ukraine and Russia for very many years. Wars obviously are ravaging people, their economies, their cultures, and nature. The Pentagon is the single greatest polluter on Earth. It puts more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere than any other single entity. And it also pollutes in terms of nuclear waste and other wastes. That pollution has led to tremendous devastation for US troops, burn pits, people breathing, the troops burning trash of all sorts. Agent Orange, a remnant of the war on Vietnam from the 1960s and 1970s, having major health implications for the young people who have been sent to fight these wars. And then wars rely on white supremacy, religious supremacy, and nationalist supremacy that claims the United States is the greatest country in the world, it's democratic, it's moral, and so forth. Well, not if you ask the people who have been attacked by the United States. Is the United States the greatest? Certainly not in terms of maintaining our infrastructure, we're not the greatest. In terms of healthcare, it's very expensive, and tens of thousands of people don't have healthcare. So it's not the greatest in that sense, but we claim that. We have a political movement in this country that wants to separate wants to combine church and state. The founding fathers of this country said you have to separate church and state because they saw the religious wars that had taken place throughout Europe and elsewhere based on religious supremacy of one religion or another. Said keep state affairs and religious affairs separate. And of course, we also have members of the MAGA right who say the white Christian race should run the United States. Everybody else should be second-class citizens or not citizens or third class. So, so wars rely on this supremacy of one sort or another. In Israel, war relies on the idea that a group of Jewish people are supreme over everybody else in the region, and everybody else takes is second class or third class or has no citizenship at all. That kind of supremacy. We have a supremacy of white nationalism in this country. We have supremacy of nationalism in a number of European countries. There's a revival of Nazism, of fascism around, especially in Europe and in the United States, based on creating a supremacy against people of color or against people who define themselves in a different way by gender or women or so forth, white male supremacy. And wars rely on this. What else does this war economy do? Well, the industrial policy of the United States, which is war, is killing the domestic industries, where you spend all of these resources, including research and development resources. We spend a huge amount in research and development, but it's focused on how to kill people. That's money that's not being spent on how to preserve people's health, how to deal and prevent cancer and heart disease and kidney disease and lung disease, how to prevent or reduce the effects of aging, how to prevent Alzheimer's disease. Money isn't being spent on that. Money's not being spent to make our transportation system more efficient or to upgrade our electric grid or make sure everybody has high-speed internet. And how do we do that? What are the best ways of doing that? The United States is no longer the major producer of research papers in major journals anymore. China is. And why is that? Because so much research is being spent on killing rather than on saving and helping people. And of course, as I said, the war economy sucks resources from all these human needs that I've mentioned. The war economy drives inflation. When you built, how many people who are listening to this have bought a jet fighter? But we spend $100 million on a jet fighter. How many people have bought a nuclear submarine? And we spend billions of dollars on a nuclear submarine. But even, a howitzer or a small ship or a rocket, we don't buy those things. They're not something that consumers can buy, but the money has gone into the economy to produce those things, but we can't use them in the civilian economy. So the cost of everything else goes up because there's money that says we can buy those. There's money in the economy to buy that from the people from the money that's spent on war, but we're not producing the products to keep the costs down. The wars, of course, target the working class. They target the people who don't have ways of keeping out of war, and they especially in countries with majority peoples of color. It's not at all surprising, at least to me, that most of the wars the United States fights are against poor people and people that we would define as people with darker pigmented skin. In Vietnam, in Africa, in Latin America, war targets people of color and it targets working people primarily. The rich get away without too much difficulty. Then there's economic warfare. There's the kinetic warfare of bombs and guns and bullets and shells and rockets, but there's also economic warfare. And economic warfare takes the form of sanctions, where the United States decides that a country like Cuba does not have the right to buy food, and so it sanctions Cuba. Does not have the right to buy uh, uh, replacement parts for its electric grid. Those sanctions on Cuba and on a bunch of other countries, and I'll give more detail down the road, impoverishes millions of people, impoverishes people. The propaganda is that the sanctions are against the governments, but the people who run the government are not hurt. It's everyday people like you and me who get sanctioned, who get prevented. And all these sanctions, by the way, are illegal according to international law. Only the United Nations Security Council has the right to introduce sanctions against a country or an entity. The United States does not. But the government of the United States does not really care about international law, and we could discuss that. So these wars, economic and kinetic wars, that is with bullets and guns and explosives, force people to migrate. So we see on our border, especially our southern border, tens of thousands of people trying to get into the United States. Why are they leaving? This is never asked. We have a big debate about how to keep them out of the United States. And both Democratic and Republican administrations are working very hard to keep migrants out of the United States. And it's not just the United States, but Europe is facing a migration crisis too. And these crises are caused by the wars in the Middle East, the wars in West Asia, the war in Afghanistan drove tens of thousands of people out of Afghanistan, from Iraq, from Libya. And where did they go? They went to where they thought they would be safe, where they could make a living, where they could keep their families alive. And so you have millions of people trying to escape. In Central and Latin America, the United States, either through wars or coups, overthrowing governments like the one in Honduras, the one in Nicaragua, trying to overthrow the Cuban government, overthrowing the Venezuelan government, the Bolivian government, one government after another, or invading, or sanctioning so that the people can't survive. They have no income and they have to leave because they can't feed their families. And so where do they go? They go to where they think they can make a living and where they might be safe. All these wars are creating this crisis, but we don't have a discussion about that. The candidates don't talk about it and didn't talk about it any more than they talk about the military budget. These are things that they're not supposed to talk about because they don't want people to start thinking about, wait a minute, we're causing, the United States is causing the problems that we are constantly trying to mitigate and not succeeding because we keep causing these problems. Well, here we have a description of what the economic sanctions, war by other means, how it impoverishes. So it blocks international financial transactions. So countries like Syria and Venezuela and Cuba, North Korea, even Russia, can't buy things that they need to buy because the United States prevents them from purchasing foods and medicines, infrastructure equipment, as I've mentioned, for the electrical grid or for cleaning the water up, chemicals to make sure that the water is safe, industrial machinery. They can't purchase these things because the U.S. prevents it. It prevents them from exchanging money. It prevents them from selling their own products. They can't sell their own commodities because anybody who does business with a country that's been sanctioned. If it's a bank or an industry, then that industry or that bank gets sanctioned or fined by the United States. These are overwhelming weapons, and they cause overwhelming disaster for the countries that have been so sanctioned. And I just listed here, there are 40 countries the United States has sanctioned. Mind you, that there are under 200 countries in the world, so 40 countries represents 20% of the world's countries, and it actually represents a majority of the world's population. The United States has sanctioned all of these countries. They're not all sanctioned to the same extent. The biggest sanctions may be on Russia and Cuba and Venezuela and the People's Democratic Republic of Korea, but China's also sanctioned, and places like Zimbabwe sanctioned by the United States. All of these countries that are sanctioned, illegally sanctioned by the United States, uh, are uh, the people are in it creates desperation, and it creates, of course, migration, among other things. So this is part of our war economy. So this is very profitable for the military industrial complex. War is business to them. And you see it in Connecticut very well. Our members of Congress are only too happy to see the war industries in Connecticut prosper. Sikorsky, which builds both civilian and military helicopters, Pratt and Whitney, which builds civilian and military engines, and Electric Boat, which builds only military nuclear submarines. They're profiting, and they're profiting big time, hundreds of billions of dollars in profits. And it's our money that's making them profitable. And we're sort of killing ourselves by making them profitable, because we're depriving ourselves of all of the human needs by putting it into those military industries. So let me just recap. Over $1 trillion every year goes to the Pentagon for ongoing and future wars. It's 2/3 of the federal discretionary budget. Discretionary means it's the budget that Congress and the president control every year. It excludes special programs like Social Security and Medicare that have their own taxes and their own budgets. So it's those things that I described. It's health, human welfare, housing, transportation. So 2/3 of the federal discretionary budget goes to killing. And of course, this fills the coffers of the merchants of death, the military industrial complex. They're getting rich. It stalls all human needs in our country and elsewhere, because it encourages other countries to build up their defenses to try to defend themselves from the United States, which is the country that has started more wars than any other country. It's decaying our infrastructure, and it's not dealing with climate scorching, the heating of the climate. It's not dealing with environmental destruction. So what are the alternatives? How do we force our elected officials, the candidates at all levels, to talk about this critical ongoing train wreck, which is the military industrial complex and the military budget? How do we do something about it? Well, it's defended. That is, this military spending is defended as providing jobs. All of our members of Congress, and I've just cut some headlines out here that point out Rosa DeLauro and Joe Courtney and Senators Blumenthal and Murphy, are more than happy to see money coming into Connecticut to produce these weapons of war, because they're jobs, and they are, and many of them are good jobs, well-paying jobs, good benefits. So they support that, and of course, there's no good reason to oppose good jobs that pay well and have good benefits. There are good reasons to oppose putting all that money into building killing machines, but our members of Congress, and this is true throughout the country. I've just used the example of Connecticut because that's where we are. But all of the members of Congress have in their districts one sort of military industry after another. If it's a military base or it's a subcontractor for one of the great, huge military producers like Lockheed Martin or General Dynamics or Raytheon or Boeing, they have jobs in their districts. So they're very reluctant to cut the military budget, and they don't have an alternative to it. They never talk about an alternative to spending money on the military to create jobs. But what do these jobs look like? And are they the best jobs? So here we have a chart. Here we have a chart that looks at the number of jobs that are created from $260 billion. If the government spends $260 billion, it's about a quarter of what the government spends on the Pentagon every year. How many jobs would you get? Well, if you look on the left-hand side of this chart, federal defense produces for that amount of money just under 2 million jobs, maybe 1,800,000 jobs, something like that. If you put that money into windmills or solar panels and retrofits of buildings to make them more efficient, on average, which is the next set of bars on the chart, you get about 2.5 million jobs instead of 1.8 million. So you get about a quarter more or a third more jobs by putting money into renewable energy. And these are good jobs. These are not low paying, but they're good jobs. And some of them, or most of them, are jobs which are jobs that require, working with your hands. So we're not talking about social service jobs. On the other hand, there are also social service jobs. For example, if you put the money into primary and secondary school education, you get 5 million jobs. Well, that's a huge increase over 1.8 million, 5 million. You get nearly 3 million jobs in higher education. And the average across all of the educational years is about 4 million jobs. So it's practically 3 times as many jobs in that area. If it's in infrastructure, you get 2.5 million jobs. And in healthcare, you get almost 4 million jobs. So you get in these social services even more jobs, far more jobs than you get by spending money on the weapons industry, so-called defense. These are when we spend money on jobs making killing machines and producing war, we're losing the opportunity of spending that money on things that we actually need and that we can use and we can buy in this country. We're not spending money where we should. And we get fewer jobs by putting money into this sector. This is something also that our legislators, our candidates never talk about. So, national security. We're constantly being told that spending money on weapons and war is national security. Well, is that the case? What is national security? This is never discussed in any detail. National security is usually discussed as we're going to prevent some other country from invading us. But in fact, there are really no countries that want to invade a powerful country like the United States. They have no need, and it'd be very, very difficult to do so. National security means preventing pandemics. The map on the top in red and yellow and tan is a map that shows what happened during the COVID pandemic. The United States was number one in killing people through the pandemic. We had the number one deaths. National security is having good jobs. It means less personal and government debt. It means affordable health care and housing and education. It means saving the environment from overheating. It means preventing nuclear war, which would destroy all of civilization. And it means avoiding conventional wars. That to me would be national security, avoiding wars rather than constantly starting them. It would mean closing 800 foreign military bases the United States has all around. And that's the blue and gray map that shows that 800 bases in all over Africa, in Europe, in Latin America, and in Asia. We have these bases. There's no other country in the world that has a 50th of the number. It doesn't have 20 bases. There's no other country that has 20 bases. The United States has 800 or more. National security means ending police violence. It means ending the violence on the street. It means ending mass killings in this country by someone who has an automatic or semi-automatic weapon. It means safe water. It means safe food, and it means secure borders. It means that people aren't trying to get into this country because they're not being driven out of their own countries by policies the United States is engaged in. So where's their hope to change the situation? Where are the handles we can grab on to? And here's a short listing of some of the exceptions to the silence that is so loud from our candidates and our elected officials. So in 2023, there was actually a vote on cutting the military budget by 10%. So at that time, it would have been 740, 700, $800 billion budget. So $74 billion would be cut, 1/10, not a huge amount, 1/10. Some of that is lost in the accounting of a Pentagon that has never passed an audit. They just lose the money, and only they know where it is. So 125 House members voted, yes, cut the military budget by 10%, and 23 senators. Well, there are 50 senators, so almost half of the Senate voted yes, cut the military budget. They were all Democrats. We have the final National Defense Authorization Act. Who voted no? We actually had people vote against funding the Pentagon because of the waste and destruction. And so there were 43 House members and 14 members of the Senate who voted against it. There's a proposal by Congresswoman Barbara Lee and Congressman Mark Pocan to cut the military budget by half. It's in there. It's House Resolution 1003. The Poor People's Campaign, which you may have heard of, led by Reverend William Barber and others, called for a $350 billion cut it by half. The U.S. Conference of Mayors passed a resolution. This is the mayors of cities over 35,000. All the mayors in 2017 said we should have public hearings on cutting the military budget and pass city resolutions, which is basically the Move the Money campaign. Cut the military budget. And then there are the city resolutions. The moneyforhumanneeds.org website has some of these resolutions that have been passed and organizing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Even a mainstream a magazine like Scientific American said, defund the Pentagon. This is a terrible disaster. It's a waste and it's a disaster. So here's specific cities with Move the Money campaigns. In all of the cities, Detroit and Hamtramck, Michigan, in New Haven, Connecticut, in Charlottesville, Virginia, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in New York, there are resolutions that have either passed or in the works to cut the military budget and put the money to human needs, to sustainable development, to a just transition, that is moving the jobs that people have making weaponry and fighting wars into jobs, making sure they have jobs in a civilian sector that provides for human needs. We have the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the Poor People's Campaign, and some of the members of Congress who have been supporting taking money out of the military and putting it into human needs. Here I have some of the language of the Detroit City Council resolution from February this year. Detroit is the latest city to pass a resolution for the Move the Money campaign, cut the military budget. And I'm going to read this if it's all right. I'll try to be quick about it, but I think it's important to hear this. Whereas this is only part, I cut out part because it's long. Whereas the United States spent over $877 billion on the military in 2022, more than China, Russia, who are our adversaries, in quotes, India, Saudi Arabia, United Kingdom, Germany, France, South Korea, Japan, and Ukraine combined, and the latter ones are all allies of the United States. Whereas the United States spent all this money, whereas in 2023, the Biden administration submitted a Department of Defense budget request of $842 billion for fiscal year 2024, that's the year that just finished, which Congress increased to $886 billion. And whereas as the Pentagon budget nears $1 trillion, the Department of Defense announces it has failed a sixth audit and can't account for half of its assets. It fails an audit. And this is the end of that. I've cut out some paragraph, but this is the end of that resolution from the Detroit City Council. Whereas according to the National Priorities Project, a $100 billion Pentagon cut could pay for the following: the clean energy and child care provisions in Biden's beleaguered Build Back Better initiative, power every household in the United States with solar energy, hire 1 million elementary school teachers, furnish free tuition for 2 out of 3 public college students in the U.S., send every household in the U.S. a $700 check to help offset the effects of inflation, and finally, resolve that the Council of the City of Detroit calls on the U.S. Congress and the President to move significant funds from the military budget in order to fund social services and to hold in-depth public hearings on the basic human needs of city residents that are unmet because of government appropriations for the Pentagon. That is in this resolution that passed Detroit, one of our biggest cities, City Council. So here is an example that's closer to home of what we could have if we took all of the money. I'm not proposing that we take all of the money, but if we took all of the money, or we compared what we could get for the tax money that goes to the Pentagon in fiscal year 2023, the latest figures I have for the state of Connecticut, 19.6 billion of our taxes went to the Pentagon. And instead of that, we could have 100,000 public housing units for 1 year and 200,000 children receiving low-income health care for 2 years. And we could have 12,000 elementary school teachers for 2 years who would pay for that. And we could have 100,000 Head Start slots for children for 3 years. And we could have 20,000 university scholarships for 4 years, free higher education. And 20,000 clean energy jobs for 1 year, high-paying clean energy jobs. And 20,000 jobs paying $15 per hour for 3 years. And 15,000 registered nurses for 1 year. There's a shortage of nurses. And 500,000 households with solar for 5 years. We could have all of that with the money that is spent. Even if we cut it in half, you would cut these numbers in half, which would be huge for Connecticut. It would make life for people in Connecticut far better than it is now. So what's the point? I'm coming to the end of this presentation. What's the point? Move the money. The heart of this empire the United States is trying to maintain is military spending. Militarism permeates and is destroying our society. Our police forces are becoming militarized. We see militants carrying around guns and automatic rifles. We see all sorts of violence in our communities. That in part is because of the militarism that is encouraged by the way. That's what you follow the money. If you're supporting violence, you get violence. It's to generate a discussion where our candidates and our elected officials are silent. They don't talk about it. It's to reach out to friends and coworkers and to the social justice organizations to unify them around a major goal, to mobilize the community around a major goal, and that is to create and pass a city or state resolution calling to move the money from the military, from the war, from killing to human needs. Instead of killing, saving, preserving, building, and to pressure the government to provide real security, which keeps on decreasing in this country. The point is to build local and regional coalitions and unify around these goals. Cut the military budget, redirect the money, save to good jobs with a just transition, making sure that people who are working in these military industries keep jobs, have other jobs, have income, while we are changing our economy from one that is a war economy to a peace economy, redirecting money to healthcare, housing, education, safe food, clean water, a healthy environment, and so many more things that we desperately need. So that's the end of that. That's the end of the presentation. This slide has a set of URLs, links, some references where you can get more information on some of the individual slides. I had QR codes where you could specifically get the reference information to the presentation. So that's it. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Okay, let me ask a few questions. Could you elaborate on what they call just transition?
Thank you. That is really a really good question. Back in the 1980s, there was a major effort to create a just transition to move the money from the military. It was led by the international president of the Machinists Union, the International Association of Machinists, William Wimpesinger, and it had many peace groups and environmental economic groups involved. And because the Machinists Union represents workers at Boeing, for example, they're on strike, or they may have just finished their strike at Boeing, and at Pratt and Whitney and at Electric Boat, and in most of the war industries, the Machinists Union is present. In order to succeed, we want to cut the military budget, but we don't want people who are highly skilled and have families and depend on an income. We don't want them to be thrown out of work. We want them to be able to continue to work in their trade, in jobs that are created in the civilian economy, in building wind turbines, in building high-speed transportation, in building ships that we need for commerce, in building trains and buses, in building solar and other kinds of sustainable things, in rehabbing buildings themselves that are wasteful of energy so that we don't waste energy, in rebuilding and upgrading the grid, all of these things. Plus, there are many people who will retire and make sure that they have benefits, they have their pensions, and others who want to take on, maybe they'd be happy to go into the healthcare field, or they'd like to become teachers. Maybe they would like to be experts to teach the next generation of machinists and electricians and plumbers. And we would make sure they had income in between leaving a job in the military to having a job in the civilian economy. The same kind of just transition has to take place in the fossil fuel industry. We have people who are now working in the fossil fuel industry, and as we hopefully reduce burning of fossil fuels, which is leading to the destruction of our climate as it exists, We see it with the floods and the fires and the droughts and the huge storms that are taking place and the devastation that we've seen in the Southeast this year, but all across the world. We have to cut back on fossil fuels, and there has to be an approach which is a just transition. There are some studies that show that this is possible. There's one study that comes out of the University of Massachusetts that shows it wouldn't be that expensive to take all of the coal miners in Pennsylvania and provide them with income and find them other jobs so that they're not losing income when we stop mining coal, so that the people who are working in refineries don't lose their income and their benefits as we reduce the refining of oil. That's a just transition. And we have other areas of the economy where we need this kind of transition. So we're looking at this whole question of transitioning a society from one that's not sustainable, that's very violent, into a society that is peaceful and sustainable and healthy for ourselves and our kids and our grandkids and for the planet. And to do that, we want to make sure that the workers who are affected by this transition are taken care of. We don't want to throw anybody out of work. We don't want to throw anybody out of their houses. We don't want to stop people from being able to afford college education for their kids or lose their pensions. That's a just transition. And that is something that there are people around the country who are looking at, but as of now, there's very little leadership out of the US government. And there's practically no leadership out of the corporations who are making a lot of money doing what they're doing.
How can people get more involved with Move the Money campaign?
Well, there's a website, Money for Human Needs. It's the top URL on this slide. Moneyforhumanneeds.org. There's a link there. You can find out. In Connecticut, you can contact the Greater New Haven Peace Council. You can get in touch with me through the Greater New Haven Peace Council. It's my email is grnh for Greater New Haven, grnh Peace Council, all one word, at gmail.com, grnhpeacecouncil@gmail.com. And of course, there are active Move the Money campaigns in a number of cities that we're trying to increase that around the country. There's a very big Move the Money campaign, a coalition developing in Michigan. Right now, Michigan is the hotspot, but there's also one in New York, another hotspot, biggest city in the country, trying to get a resolution through the city council in New York. So I think that I'm happy to be the point person for that kind of contact.
Could you talk about the campaign in New Haven that you were involved in a number of years ago?
Right. So New Haven's campaign, there have been several campaigns in New Haven, actually, one in 2012 and one in 2020. And in both of these campaigns, the end result, let me talk about the success of these campaigns, and then I'll try to describe how we got there, which is not the only way to get there, but it is the way we took. What we did in 2012 and 2020 was working with coalition partners, and I need to discuss that in more detail, but working with coalition partners, introduce into our city council, which is called the Board of Alders, a resolution working with the Board of Alders to draft the resolution, we introduced a resolution that basically was like the Detroit resolution. It said, here's where all this money is going, and here's what we need. Let's move it from that pot where it's going, which is war and violence, into the pot that it's needed, which is human life and human needs. And we got the city council, the Board of Alders, to pass the resolutions, but also we asked the Board of Alders to put the resolution on the ballot, the presidential ballot for those years, 2012 and 2020, presidential election years. Put it on the ballot in New Haven. And they agreed. And so the resolutions ended up being referenda on the ballots, so people could vote yes or no. So it's not only a group of people in the peace movement and in some of the social justice movements representing certain organizations, but it's offering the people of the city an opportunity individually to vote on this. And so they did. And in each case, 83% of the population of New Haven who voted, 83% voted yes, move the money from war and killing to human needs. That's 5 out of 6 people voted yes. An enormous majority in the city said. And to be candid about it, we did not reach 20 or 30 or 40,000 people who vote in New Haven. We were far too small and don't have the resources to reach everybody. So for many people, it was the first time they saw the language of this referendum. And they saw the language, move the money from killing to saving, to making life possible, and they voted yes. They voted yes. So that's the end result in both cases. Now, what we did in 2020 is that we went to unions, and we went to the labor community coalition called New Haven Rising, and we went to the NAACP, we went to the Junta for Progressive Action, the Latino organization. We went to a number of organizations and made a pitch to them and said, would you support this resolution in the Board of Alders? And so we created a coalition of about 2 dozen organizations, Community Center, the Peace Council, other organizations joined in this coalition. And we basically lobbied our Board of Alders to, first of all, they had a hearing, and we made a presentation at the hearing. We also invited, I've mentioned once or twice in this presentation, the National Priorities Project, but we've had people from this project come and make presentations, public presentations. The National Priorities Project looks at these trade-offs that I pointed out, what you could get in terms of human needs if you didn't spend so much money on the military, on the Pentagon. And we had people come and make formal presentations. So that was the way we did it here. I have to say, I thought that was the way that everybody should do it, but our colleagues in Detroit decided they would first lobby the members of city council and then create a coalition once they passed the resolution. And so they managed to get the resolution passed because they were able to convince the city council to pass it. And then based on the passed resolution, what can you do now to move this whole process forward? Because it has to go, we have to, the members of city council, city government don't vote on the military budget. And they're very happy to remind you, we don't vote on the military budget, right? But you are the closest representatives to the constituents of our House members and our Senate members. If you make this point, it will have an impact on our representatives in Congress and on the executive in the White House. So we've convinced them to do that, and they have. As the U.S. Conference of Mayors has done so as well. The resolution in the U.S. Conference of Mayors in 2017 was introduced by then Mayor Tony Harp of New Haven, but it passed unanimously. Hold public hearings, call for cutting the military budget, put the money to human needs. So that's in brief. I mean, it means some, shoe leather. It means talking to people. It means people, of course, are very receptive. If you're trying to make sure your constituents have food on the table, or that their kids are getting a decent education, or people have housing, they're not being thrown out into the street. You don't have to make it. It's not. You don't have to twist any arms to convince them that
Mhm.
there's money there, and it comes from the military budget, because they see that the military budget isn't helping them, but putting money directly into human needs would help them and their constituents. So it's not a hard sell, but you have to do the work to go out and talk to them.
Have you talked about the trillions of dollars that are going into the modernization of nuclear weapons?
So this is part of what the militarization of society is.
Mhm.
Under President Obama, President Obama proposed upgrading and building new nuclear weapons in the United States at the cost of $1.2 trillion over 30 years.
Mhm.
It's an enormous quantity of money, but that means the nuclear submarines that are being built in New London and Groton. It means the rockets, the land-based missiles. It means the airplanes that carry nuclear weapons, the so-called triad, and the bombs themselves. And it didn't take many years for the cost to raise the cost to 1.8 trillion from 1.2 trillion. It didn't take many years. It's going to keep on going up because all of these systems, uh, the companies that put in bids always underestimate what it's going to cost, and they make sure that they love these contracts. They're guaranteed profits. They don't have to compete in the rest of the world. The government gives the monopoly, and they make the products, and they make huge profits. So we have a project in the United States to uh, make more nuclear weapons, and that comes on the base. It's very important. It comes on the back of George Bush and other presidents canceling nuclear weapons treaties. So once you cancel the treaties, which were negotiated by all of the nuclear powers. There are 9 nuclear weapons states in the world: the United States, Britain, France, Russia, China, Israel, Pakistan, and India, and North Korea. All of these countries have nuclear weapons. And there were treaties that were negotiated among at least some of them. The primary ones, the US and the Soviet Union, and now Russia. The US presidents have basically thrown out these treaties. The treaties were intended to reduce the threat of a nuclear war by reducing the number of nuclear weapons and how they would be tested and where they could be situated and whether there would be anti-nuclear weapons, anti-ballistic weapons made, which was a new arms race. These treaties have been trashed by the United States. And the reason is that the companies who make these weapons were able to convince our government that they could make a lot of money, and they would be happy to put some of it into lobbying and into campaigns and so forth. And of course, they would produce some jobs and convince the president of the United States to cancel these treaties. So we have now a new arms race, a new nuclear arms race, because the other countries see the United States rebuilding and upbuilding and increasing its weaponry. And so they're following the same path because they feel threatened by it, which is the intention. And then the United States goes back and says, Russia's increasing its nuclear weapons. We have to increase ours even more. China's making more weapons. We have to increase ours more. This is a lose-lose game, except for the military industries where it's win-win. And they're getting very rich, very fast, richer and faster. But for the rest of us, it's huge resources and, of course, the threat that someone will intentionally use a nuclear weapon. And all of the parties agree that once someone uses a nuclear weapon, we'll have all-out nuclear war. There's no small nuclear war. And it will be the end of civilization as we know it. A small nuclear weapon currently small nuclear weapon hitting the center of New Haven would, for 300 yards, sorry, not 300 yards, basically for a mile and a half to 2 miles in every direction, everything would be gone, burned and vaporized, and then lesser destruction. But pretty much everybody killed out to the suburbs of New Haven. Everybody killed. If that was a small nuclear weapon hitting New Haven, and of course any other city. Nothing special about New Haven and being destroyed by a nuclear weapon. And what we have right now is two nuclear powers, the United States, well, four nuclear powers, the United States, Britain, France, and Russia, on opposite sides of a war in Ukraine. And we have another nuclear power, Israel, with the help of the United States, a nuclear power, nuclear weapons state, fighting wars in the Middle East. So we have the potential for a nuclear exchange. The mechanism for that within a war, but there's also the possibility of an accident. We've had many accidents, as Joe, you've pointed out to me and to others many times. Many accidents, many misreading of radar information that looks like a nuclear attack. And the country responding to a nuclear attack has just a few minutes to decide, are we going to lose all of our nuclear weapons or are we going to use them? And if that, in either case, you have an enormous disaster that we can't imagine. We cannot imagine it. Nuclear weapons have been used once, twice against Japan by the United States in 1945. Two cities, Nagasaki and Hiroshima, were devastated. But the rest of Japan wasn't nuked. But in a nuclear war in today, big cities and maybe some of the smaller and medium-sized cities are all targeted. They'd all go. There would be no healthcare system left, no educational system left, no transportation hubs left, no energy systems left. The estimate is that a small nuclear exchange between India and Pakistan, 50 nuclear weapons total, would create a cloud of dust so thick that would travel around the world and prevent the sun from reaching the earth. And the average temperature would drop to such a degree that food could not be grown. Life in the ocean would be killed. Life on land would starve. And we're talking about a small nuclear exchange, 3 billion people. And I think that's an underestimate because there wouldn't be food stocks for the rest of us. And what would we do when the food runs out? Where would we go? What kind of civilization would be left? And that's, again, a small nuclear exchange on the other side of the globe. So a major nuclear exchange between any of the major nuclear weapon states, the United States, Britain, France, Russia, China, these would be they're unimaginable destruction. And it could happen by accident, it could happen intentionally. We're under this threat. There are two existential threats existing right now. One is nuclear war, and the second is the scorching of the climate. We see what's happening with the climate, and it's going ahead faster than was predicted, but it's going ahead slowly. We could stop it, although the leaders in the United States are not wedded to the idea of stopping it. They'd rather see the oil companies make money as long as they can. But we see that but nuclear weapons, if they're used, it's fast. Within a few days, it's all over, except for the pain and the dying.
Mhm.
These are the two existential threats. The bulletin of the atomic scientist takes both of them into account. It's moved the atomic clock to 90 seconds before midnight, the closest to midnight it's been ever, which is a measure of the threat of existential destruction of human civilization. So these are the two things that should take our attention, but regrettably, we're focused on calling each other names. We're focused on scapegoating immigrants and people of color and attacking women's health rights, and so forth.
Mhm. So, Henry, before we wrap up, could you give the contact information that if people want to get more involved with the Move the Money campaign, move the money from the military to human needs?
So I suggest you look into the move moneyforhumanneeds.org. The website's a bit dated, but it's still relevant. Or send an email to grnhpeacecouncil@gmail.com. grnh Peace Council. And if you're not in Connecticut, I will put you in touch with people. If I can, I'll put you in touch with people where they are.
Mhm. Yes. So, peace is critical to everything. We cannot um, be targeting each other's cities with nuclear weapons forever and think that's sustainable. We need to work to cut the money going towards modernizing these nuclear weapons, cut the military, cut the constant export of weapons all around the world. The U.S. is the biggest exporter of weapons all around the world. That does not help. And move that money towards the critical needs we have here at home, such as dealing with education, mass transit, infrastructure, etc. Thank you.